Auzubillahi minash-shaytanir-rajim. This is listening practice and 3.4 element of NEBOSH International Journal Certificate IG1 risk assessment. Keywords and perhaps phrases. Keywords and phrases. Hazard and risk. Hazard. Something with the potential to cause harm. Physical, chemical, biological, ergonomic, psychological. Risk. The likelihood of a harm occurring in combination with the severity of foreseeable harm. Group exercise. Consider a specific hazard and discuss in groups the difference between hazardous and properties of the activity, article, or substance and the risk of the harm occurring. Keywords and phrases. Risk profiling. The process of identifying and assessing the range of risks that threaten an organization along with recognition of their likelihood and probable impacts, the current risk management controls in place, and the identification and prioritization of further control measures. Risk assessment, the formal processes of identifying preventive and protective measures by evaluating the risk arising from a hazards, taking into account the adequacy of any existing controls and deciding whether or not the risk is acceptable. Risk profiling, each organization will have its own risk profiling. A risk profile examination examines the nature and level of threats faced by the organization, the likelihood of those adverse effects occurring, the level of disruption and cost associated with each type of risk, the effectiveness of controls in place to manage those risks. Risk profiling. The outcome of risk profiling will be that the right risks have been identified and prioritized for action. The right control measures have been identified and implemented, and minor risks have not been given a disproportionate priority. Risk profiling. The risk profiling process identify the risks that threaten the organization, identify the health and safety impacts and the business impacts associated with each threat, identify how well each threat is controlled, identify the likelihood of each threat happening, prioritize the threats. Purpose of risk assessment to prevent death and personal injury, the other types of loss incident, breaches of state law, statute law, the cost of loss. A suitable and sufficient assessment identifying significant risk enable employer to identify and prioritize control measure appropriate to the nature of the work, proportionate to the risks, valid for a reasonable time. Group exercise. Sources can be internal or external to the organization. List all the internal and external sources you can think of and discuss them. The 5 steps of risk assessment as defined by the HSE. Step 1, identify the hazard. Step 2, identifying the people who might be harmed and how. Step 3, evaluate the risk and decide on precautions. Step 4, record the significant findings and implement. Step 5, review and update as necessary. Step 1, identify the hazards, safety, capable of causing physical injury, work at height, falling objects, moving vehicles, machinery, electricity, chemicals, low oxygen concentration, deep water, fire explosion, animals, violence. Health, capable of causing occupational disease or ill health, physical, chemical, biological, ergonomic, psychological. Internal and external information sources. Internal information, accident records, ill health data, absence reports, medical records, risk assessments, maintenance reports, safety inspections, audit and investigation reports, safety committee minutes. External national legislation, approved codes of practice, standards, BSI, ISO, manufacturers, information, trades, associations, safety publications, internal bodies, trade unions, charities. Hazard identification methods, task analysis, analyzes job components before the job starts, legislation, standard guidance documents, manufacturer's information, operating handbook, chemical safety data sheets, incident data, incidents, near misses, ill health. Hazard identification method, task analysis, select the task, record the stages of the task, evaluate risks associated with each stage, develop the safe working method, implement the safe working method, monitor to ensure effectiveness. Step 2, identify the people at risk, workers, operators, maintenance staff, cleaners, contractors, visitors, member of the public, even trespassers. Identify the people at risk. Vulnerable groups are individuals, young people, new or expectant mothers, disabled workers, lone workers. Evaluating the risk and deciding on precautions. Is the level of risk acceptable or does it need to be reduced? Risk is equal to likelihood and severity. Risk is a combination of likelihood and severity. Likelihood 1, extremely unlikely. Severity 1, very minor injury. Likelihood unlikely. Severity first aid injury. Likelihood possible. Severity lost time injury. Likelihood likely. Severity hospital treatment. Likelihood very probably. Severity disabling injury. Evaluating the risk and deciding on precautions. Risk is equal to likelihood and severity. Risk is equal to likelihood and severity. General hierarchy of control. Elimination, substitution, engineering control, administrative control, and PPs. PP is the last line of defense. General hierarchy of control. Elimination, substitution, engineering control, isolation, total enclosure, separation, segregation, partial enclosure, safety devices, administrative control, safety safe system of work, reduce exposure, reduced time of exposure, dose, information, instruction, training, and supervision. PP. Safety signs, prohibition, warning, mandatory, safe condition, fire equipment. Personal protective equipment, PP. Personal protective equipment regulations 1992 as amended. Supply suitable PP appropriate for risk. Ergonomic fits does not increase overall risk, complies with standards, ensure compatibility of item, suitable storage, information, instruction and training, enforce use of PPE, replace or repair damaged or lost items. Group exercise discuss the benefits and limitations of PPE as a risk of control method. Personal protective equipment, PPE, merits and limitations. Merits can be used as an interim control list. More expensive or difficult controls are put in place. In some situations, it may be the only control option available. It may be needed as a backup for emergencies when other controls have failed. It is usually cheap. It gives immediate protection. Limitation, it only protects one person, the wearer. It may not protect adequately if it is not fitted correctly. It may not be comfortable and may interfere with the wearer's ability to do the job. It may increases overall risk by impairing the sense goggles that messed up. It may not be compatible with other items that have to be worn or used. People do not like wearing PP. If it fails to danger, the worker is exposed to risk. Use of guidance and legal standards. Use of a risk matrix levels that require action within set time scales. Legal requirements override the findings of a risk assessment. Even if the risk is low, if the law requires it, then it must be done. Applies also to semi-legal codes of practice. Guidance can also assist. Residual acceptable and tolerable risk. Residual risk, the risk level we are left with after controls have been implemented. Acceptable risk, the risk has been reduced to an adequate level. Tolerable risk, no acceptable but can live with it for a short period of time with interim controls. Unacceptable risk, risk is too high. Step 4, record significant findings and implementing. Typical count. Typical content. Activity area assessed and hazards. Group at risk. Risk and adequacy of existing control measures. Further precautions needed. Date and name of competent person. Review date. Step 5, review. Significant change in process, substances, equipment, workplace, environment, personnel. If it is no longer valid, accident, near miss, ill health, change to legal standards. Periodically, group exercise, lawn moving. Using task analysis, prepare a brief risk assessment and suggest control measure to reduce the risk involved with this activity. Special cases and vulnerable workers. Young persons under 18, lack of experience, physical and mental maturity, poor risk perception influenced by peer group, eager control measure prohibit certain high risk activities, high risk machinery, restrict work patterns and horse. No overtime, train and supervise. Special cases and vulnerable workers. New and expectant mothers. Certain chemicals lead, certain biological agents, rubella virus, manual handling, temperature extremes, whole body vibration, ionizing radiation, night shift, stress, violence. Special cases and vulnerable workers. Disabled workers identify health and fitness criteria for some jobs, eyesight requirements to drive forklift trucks, workers with non-disabilities, what are the implications of their disability? Special cases, lone workers, workers especially vulnerable and more at risk of violence, prison officers, mental health nurse, if they are injured or ill, confined space entry. Thank you.